All right, well, we're here today to talk about Palo Alto's big infrastructure plans and also its challenges with rising costs. We're here joined by Brad Eggleston, Assistant Director of Public Works for the City of Palo Alto.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. There's a lot to unpack here, so we look forward to diving into it with you. There are a lot of infrastructure plans that are queued up right now. It seems like we're poised for major transformation in Palo Alto, whether it's fire stations, bike boulevards, new public safety building. My understanding is, though, that there's some issues with rising costs because of the climate, construction climate around here. Could you tell us a little bit about what the city's facing in terms of the projects and how we're going to get there?
Sure. Well, I think I'll just walk it back a little bit and
Sure.
take us back to the time at 2013 and 2014 when the City Council was developing its infrastructure plan that we're working on now. So at that time, we were kind of coming out of a phase where there had actually been a downturn and some decrease in construction costs. We had cost estimates for some high priority projects that we've been talking about for some time. And some of them were already several years out of date. But we worked with the City Council and put together the infrastructure plan. We call it the Council Infrastructure Plan. And I believe it had total estimated costs and funding sources of around $135 million. So this was June of 2014, and we began working on the projects and budgeting them. And as time went on, construction costs have escalated, and we've been updating the project costs and also updating some of the funding sources and adding additional funding. But basically with where we are now, having made kind of some significant design progress on several of the projects and actually getting under construction with a couple of them, we've got a funding gap of about $50 million in a plan of about $230 million that we're currently looking to try to address.
So I'm curious, given these funding challenges and the fact that costs have risen so dramatically since just 2014, has the council given any thought, or has staff given any thought to kind of taking some of the projects from the plan out of the plan? I mean, and the reason I'm asking, I know that it was kind of a council's commitment in getting the hotel tax passed, so I feel like they've been pretty committed to it, but given the fact that circumstances changes so dramatically, is that something that staff is thinking about? Or
There's been some discussion about it. We haven't really discussed that with the council yet at this point, other than last Monday night. I gave a presentation where that was raised as a potential option. We're actually going to meet with the Finance Committee next Tuesday evening to talk about coming up with a plan, and I think that might be part of what's discussed. Like I said, we're underway with work on almost all these projects. So it's more difficult to take a project where you've already invested staff time and spent money on a design consultant team and set that aside.
That would be pretty unusual, wouldn't it? I mean, to halt work, not thinking that you're stopping it, forever, but doing the work and then stopping it for 3 or 4 years and then picking it up. Has the city done that before? Or?
Well, unfortunately, I'd say that the public safety building project, our highest priority project in the whole plan, has a long history. The city's been trying to work on that for about 20 years now. And it was 2008 in the downturn where we had actually paid money for the option to purchase a site on Park Boulevard. And we were underway with design and actually had even completed an EIR. And because of the financial downturn at that time, we had to essentially completely stop the project.
Yeah.
So that now we're essentially starting over
On a different
scratch,
parcel.
really,
Yeah.
on a different parcel.
And you just mentioned the public safety building is kind of the biggest priority, and it has been for some time. Now
Right.
that infrastructure committee kind of recommended it as something that urgently needs to be replaced. And yet, in the context of the current infrastructure plan, it's kind of in the back of the queue as far as when construction is going to start. like it's after the garages, which I'm not sure.
It is the last project to begin construction.
Can you explain that, why it's so
Yes.
late in the end of the process?
So really, it has to do with the whole process we went through to find a site for the public safety building, which was going on over the last couple of years. And we really did a comprehensive look at sites all around the city that could be available and zeroed in on a few city-owned sites. And that resulted in the California area surface parking lot being selected. And as we all know, and we discussed with the city council last week, there's kind of an urgent need for parking and parking issues in the California Avenue area. So as we surfaced this idea and also began to discuss it with the local merchants here who are very concerned about parking, we essentially made a commitment from the beginning that if we built the public safety building here, we would also build the new California Avenue garage, which is another of the projects, and that we would complete the garage before breaking ground on the public safety building. So essentially, because these two projects are happening on two adjacent surface parking lots, if we were to not complete the garage before beginning the public safety building, we'd be taking away all the parking from both lots for some period of time.
So there's one and only
We've
thing
committed not to do that.
there's one thing more urgent than emergency services is California Avenue parking.
Yes.
It's
But it does introduce this issue of construction cost escalation, where the combined escalation that we're planning for in our cost estimates for the Cal Ave garage and public safety building is about $350,000 a month.
which is a pretty crazy figure.
It's very significant.
Which brings us to Palo Alto Process. Yeah, it's a phrase that has been used, a lot in the past. Not so much now. I feel like the city has done some stuff in developing services to speed things up. But when it comes to approving a major public works project or even a major private development, it's still a fairly lengthy process with multiple ARB reviews and things like that. Is there anything that you think could or should be done differently to expedite these things, just given the financial challenges and the kind of urgency of getting a new police building?
Something differently. Well, one thing we've tried to do on these projects is to actually have clear guidance from the city council on what the scope of the project is, so that when we go to the ARB or to the PTC, and they bring up rightfully some interest they have in the project and a different direction that it might go, we're able to say, we've been to the city council and discussed this. This is the scope of the project. It is this many floors. The council's already given us direction that this garage will or will not have retail, that it will be this high. So those elements are helpful. We've actually been working pretty closely with the planning department and directors of several other city departments as well. We have what we call an infrastructure plan steering committee internally that meets usually monthly at least. And the goal there is to try to make sure that city departments that influence these projects in some way are aware at a high level of what's going on and that they can take steps to try to help expedite as much as possible.
Yeah, and the figure of how much the costs are escalating was brought up 2 Thursdays ago at the ARB meeting when they were reviewing the Cal Avenue garage. And I feel like a path was brought forward by the assistant planning director, which is basically to say, you guys like the garage, can you approve it and just add some conditions? But they opted not to do so. They said, we'll review it again in another month. Right. I'm curious whether there's any kind of contemplation of maybe changing the rules to have fewer formal reviews for public projects, just given the costs, or any kind of systemic changes that are being debated in the city or anything like that? Or
there's nothing systemic at this time. What we've discussed with the planning department in the discussions I mentioned is setting a goal of not having more than 2 formal ARB hearings on projects.
3 is the maximum now. So
3 is the maximum. So that's helpful. Another thing that we've discussed that's helpful is that if we continue ARB hearings or another board and commission and don't have an approval, that we get very specific guidance on what the remaining outstanding items are. So, for instance, the meeting about the garage, which I read about in your article this morning,
You attended the meeting too, so you probably
I
didn't need
did
to
it. I
read.
did attend the meeting. Yes. For that meeting, I think the guidance we got from the ARB was specific enough that we actually are forging ahead into the next into the design development stage of design, and we don't anticipate that the decision to continue it is going to cause a project delay.
So you don't think they're going to bring up yet more items? That
Well, I hope not. I don't think so. And I will say, you know, the assistant director of planning, we discussed this at the meeting before they went the direction they went. So while we prefer to have the approval or conditional approval, what we really want is at least something where we can work and not have a delay to the project.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it's not going to add too many costs. But I wanted to ask, do you expect that these rising costs to significantly change the projects? And I just don't mean the price tag, like the actual design
The
of things.
scope of the project.
Yeah, like we saw it with the bike bridge that was, you know, kind of redesigned to reduce costs, and the council approved kind of, you know, slightly less bells and whistles than the iconic thing that we were talking about years ago. So is the way you guys are thinking about designing like the public safety building and some of the other projects down the line, has that changed at all? Like, are there fewer amenities you're expecting? Or is this more of like the thing of, it's going to cost more, but we'll find the money to make it work? Or both?
It's a little of both. You know, so the scope of the projects has increased the most actually on the 2 parking garage projects, where because of the parking issues, city council has chosen to add additional levels to the garages. And I don't think, obviously, that's not going to change. The big project is the public safety building, and that, you know, that's obviously the highest cost project. And on that project, there may still be opportunities to look at the scope, but what I would also add is that it's been in the works for so long, and the program itself has been under evaluation for so long that at the time the Blue Ribbon Commission that looked at public safety, and this was maybe 10 years ago, not the IBRC actually, but even a previous commission, they were talking about a 65,000 square foot public safety building. The IBRC did its work and kind of narrowed that down and found that they thought they could get by with a 50,000 square foot public safety building. And then in the council discussions that were subsequent to the IBRC's report, it was further reduced to 45,000 square feet. So
that just shows
we can still look at that, but I think the general feeling is that there's not a lot more space for those sort of reductions.
You mentioned the IBRC. Are there projects that the commission thought would be important for the city, but you just haven't had the chance to move forward on them? You know, they kind of fell by the wayside, because we have 9 big projects going on right now. I'm sure there are
all
other
of which are projects that the IBRC contemplated.
Right.
Yeah, they weren't thinking about bike boulevards much. They were thinking of the municipal services center.
Yeah.
And things
What other things? You know,
I think
does
the
city
municipal
need,
services center would be the biggest one that the IBRC was concerned about. And
updating that facility or replacing it altogether?
well, I think they included a cost in their report that was for replacing it entirely, and I think their near-term recommendation had been to do a study of the overall needs and to kind of also include that entire corridor. And there was some thought at the time that maybe we would want to relocate one of the car dealerships to some land at the MSC and potentially relocate some of the city operations functions away from that, the very visible freeway frontage.
Yeah.
And
pretty big.
So there was a time where we were beginning that study, and council ultimately decided not to fund it. So that's not moving forward.
Not a lot of California merchants lobbying for a new municipal center.
We're moving forward with capital improvements at the MSC that had been deferred for years. So we're in the works right now on mechanical and electrical upgrades to replace original equipment, replacing roofs. So we're kind of making an investment now with the assumption that the MSC, as it currently stands, will be there for some time.
Brad, I wanted to broaden the conversation just a little bit to understand what other cities are doing in this climate, because obviously construction's happening up and down the peninsula, and are other cities making certain decisions to either eliminate projects, not do things right now? Because I'm sure they're not finding the funding all of a sudden materializing for their projects.
I haven't talked to people from other cities who are working on large infrastructure plans like we are at the time.
We're pretty unique in that aspect.
Yeah, so I'm not
Yeah.
really sure how to answer that question,
Yeah.
except to say that anecdotally, across everyone we talk to, we hear the same stories about dramatically increased costs right now.
Yeah.
And as Eshikata mentioned when I talked to him, if the costs were decreasing and the construction is slow, it probably means that there's a recession and the city doesn't have a lot of infrastructure money, so they'll probably be using it for other sources.
When you think that about half of our total plan is paid for through certificates of participation backed by hotel tax, the transient occupancy tax, yes, it is sensitive to a recession.
A very basic question about how the city works with contractors to make these projects happen. So is the city's role strictly the management of the project, and they manage the contract managers who then have the crews to do the work, or is there actual construction work done by City of Palo Alto workers?
No, I don't think on any of these projects we would have construction work done by the city.
Okay.
So we're essentially acting as engineering project managers on most of these types of projects. Like take a project like one of the parking garages. We hire a design team that includes architects, traffic engineers, civil engineers, a whole range of disciplines. They work on the design. We kind of shepherd it through the review process, like the ARB and city's approval process and the building permit approval process. Then we hire a contractor who will actually build it, and we oversee the construction, but oftentimes on significant projects, in fact, usually we're hiring a construction management firm to even help with that. It'd definitely be way beyond the capacity of our city staff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I'd say about the infrastructure plan, this is on top of the whole rest of the regular capital plan, which is still there, and we're working on many other projects at the same time.
Right, yeah. One question that I always hear from residents is when they see something, there's a project, say it's the Bike Boulevard, and they have some comment that they want to make on it. Something, a bulb out they think is misshapen, or a speed bump's too high. How does that work in terms of they contact the city then contacts the the manager, the construction manager? How do you handle when residents are giving you input on
Most
projects
of our significant projects have signs that have contact information for city staff. We also have a generic public works engineering email address that anyone can submit comments to. We have web pages for most of our significant projects that also have email and other contact information. So
Good to
we frequently receive those sorts of comments.
I'm sure you do.
Yes.
And has the rising cost in the kind of tight construction market changed the way the city is like bidding and getting these these firms to do the work? Because it sounds like it has come up an issue in a few projects where you've received far fewer bids. So how do you deal with that? Is it getting much more complicated just to even find the workers to do this work?
It is.
So
I have to
what do
say,
you
if
guys do
I
differently?
go back a few years, I don't really remember instances where we put a project out to bid and received 0 bids. And I can think of 3 projects right now just in the last year where that's happened, where we received no bids.
That's pretty striking.
And then there's other projects where we've received only 1 bid. And really, even in addition to the construction cost escalation that we're building into these estimates, I think there's a separate factor where when contractors bidding on a project know that they might be the only bid, or there might be only 1 or 2 bids, they might put in a much higher bid just to see, well, will I get the project? And
Are you worried
make
about
a
the
higher
quality of
profit.
work or anything like that when there's like a lack of a true competitive bidding process and you're kind of forced to not forced, but almost forced to kind of go with the one contractor who bid. Like, are you concerned that that might impact quality down the road, or any kind of additional oversight?
I would be on these very significant projects we're working on. Generally, on our big projects, we go beyond the regular purchasing process, and we do what we call a pre-qualification. An example where this worked really well was the Lincoln Auto Library project. So we actually did a pre-qualification round where people who wanted to bid would have to show us that they had successful experience on similar projects, projects of that size. And then beyond even the general contractor, the subcontractors for the most important scopes of work also had to demonstrate that experience.
I'm sorry, did you say that's a new process now that was added recently, or the city's been doing that?
It's not new. We've done it before, but after the troubles the city experienced on the Mitchell Park Library Community Center project, which you may remember, one of the things we did was look at ways to strengthen that. And in particular, I think that process before then had only considered the general contractor itself. We saw a lot of problems on the Mitchell Park Library project with the subs to the contractor that were used. And so now on big projects, we're trying to look and say, well, what are the really important scopes of work here, and what qualifications do we need to see?
Yeah, that seems wise. In terms of construction, do certain firms specialize in public facilities and some focus on private facilities, or is it everybody's just building Google and they're
that's
building
generally the
Palo
way
Alto?
it is.
Which
Yes.
way? That they specialize?
That they specialize. And there
Okay.
may be some crossover, but generally there is specialization.
So what we're seeing is that other cities are also have pretty major projects, right, or public entities have major projects right now. Is that correct? I guess you were mentioning the San Francisco airport has a terminal going in.
Well, something I'd add about that is I think that's true of general contractors, but it's not necessarily true of subcontractors.
I see.
And that I think is where we really have the shortage in the skilled trades.
Okay.
I mean, you've got Facebook's project and the Apple project, and they're using a lot of the capacity for work like mechanical and electrical, and then those costs are much higher.
So just real quick, I know the fire station just broke ground last week.
Yes.
What other groundbreakings do you expect in the next 12 months this year?
Oh, wow.
What do we have to
So
do?
this is a really exciting time for us, Gennady.
Just from the infrastructure plan. I'm
Yeah,
not talking
from the
about
infrastructure plan. So we're under construction with the first phase of the bike boulevards, as you're aware. Fire Station 3 just broke ground. I think the next project is anticipated to be the CalAV garage, and that will be October. That breaks ground. Actually, I misspoke. Charleston and Rostradero corridor. The first two of 3 phases for that project are out to bid now, and probably in about 2 months we expect to break ground. So I think those are the ones that will take us probably through calendar year 2018, but at the very beginning of 2019, the Highway 101 bike pedestrian bridge would break ground, and then a few months after that, the downtown parking garage. So really
the ceremonial shovel.
a lot of
get a lot of
activity.
use. Exciting.
It's going to be a lot of shoveling. Yeah. Well, Brad, thank you for being with us today. I think it's been an enlightening discussion. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that'll wrap us up for this week of Behind the Headlines. You can always hit the subscribe or like us button below. We're on paloaltoonline.com 24/7, and you can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We will see you next week.